A little girl knocked at midnight. Mama needs help. The widowed mountain man lit every lantern. The mountain was quiet in a way that only lonely places can be. At midnight, the air was still, thick with cold, and the forest around the cabin stood dark and watchful. The widowed mountain man sat alone at his wooden table, a single lantern burning beside him. Its soft yellow light barely touched the corners of the room. He liked it that way. Too much light reminded him of a life he no longer had. His name was Elias, though very few people used it anymore. Years had passed since his wife died, yet the ache of losing her never truly left. After she was gone, he moved higher into the mountains, far from towns, far from questions, far from noise. He lived simply. He hunted, chopped wood, fixed his roof when storms tore at it, and spoke mostly to himself. Nights were the hardest, but he had learned how to survive them. One lantern, one chair, one quiet mind. Outside, the wind shifted, brushing the trees. Snow had fallen earlier that evening, covering the ground in a pale blanket. Elias had already locked the door and checked the windows. No one came this far up the mountain, especially not at night. He was safe here. Alone, but safe. Just as he reached to lower the lantern wick and prepare for sleep, a sound broke the silence. Knock, knock. Elias froze. The sound was soft, almost unsure, but it was real. His hand stayed in the air, fingers trembling slightly. No one knocked on his door, ever. His mind raced through possibilities, branches, animals, the wind, but deep down he knew this was different. Then came a small voice. "Mama needs help." The words slipped through the wooden door like a whisper carried by fear. Elias stood slowly. His heart beat hard against his chest. He had not heard a child's voice in years. He moved toward the door, each step heavy, as if the floor itself resisted him. He placed his hand on the latch but did not open it yet. "Who's there?" he asked, keeping his voice steady. "It's me," the voice replied. "Please, Mama is hurt." Something twisted inside him. He pulled the door open. A little girl stood on his porch, no older than 6 or 7. She was thin, her cheeks red from the cold. Snow clung to her dark hair, and her coat was far too big, hanging off one shoulder. Her shoes were soaked, and her hands shook as she held them close to her chest. Her eyes were wide, not crying, but filled with fear and hope all at once. For a moment, Elias could not speak. The image before him felt unreal, like something from a dream he had not dared to have. "It's cold," the girl said softly. "Mama told me to knock." Elias stepped aside at once. "Come in," he said. She hesitated only a second before stepping into the cabin. Warm air surrounded her, and she let out a small breath she did not know she had been holding. Elias closed the door behind her and turned up the lantern flame slightly. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Clara," she answered. He nodded. "I'm Elias. Sit down, Clara." She sat on the bench near the fire, staring at the lantern as if it were something magical. Elias poured a cup of warm water and handed it to her. Her fingers wrapped around it slowly, carefully. "Now," he said, kneeling so he was at her level, "tell me about your mama." Clara swallowed. "She fell. She can't get up. She told me to find help. I didn't know where to go, but I saw your light." Elias felt his chest tighten, his light. He rarely let it shine outside anymore, yet somehow it had reached her. "Where is she?" he asked. "By the old trail," Clara said, pointing vaguely toward the forest. "Near the broken shed." Elias stood and looked toward the window. The forest beyond was dark, the snow reflecting faint moonlight. The trail Clara mentioned was dangerous even during the day. At night in winter it could be deadly. He looked back at the child. She was watching him closely, waiting. For the briefest moment, fear whispered in his ear. He was alone. He had built his life around staying that way. Going out meant risk, falling, freezing, not returning. But another voice rose stronger, one he had not listened to in years. It reminded him of promises once made, of nights long ago when he had sworn never to turn away from someone in need. "I'll help," he said. Clara's shoulders relaxed and she nodded as if she had known he would say that. Elias moved quickly. He pulled on his heavy coat, boots, and gloves. As he reached for a lantern, he paused. Then he reached for another, and another. Soon, one by one, he lit them all. The cabin filled with light, bright and steady, pushing back shadows that had lived there for years. Clara watched in silence. "I don't like the dark," she admitted. "Neither do I," Elias replied. He handed her a thick blanket and wrapped it around her shoulders. Then he opened the door, lifting one lantern high. As they stepped outside, the cold bit at their faces. The wind picked up, carrying snow through the trees. Elias took Clara's small hand in his large one. "Stay close," he said. They began walking down the trail, lantern light cutting a narrow path through the darkness. With every step, Elias felt the weight of the night, but also a strange warmth spreading through him. The mountains no longer felt empty. For the first time in a long while, he was not walking alone. Behind them, the cabin stood glowing on the hill, every lantern still lit, shining like a promise into the dark. The wind grew stronger as they moved deeper into the forest. Snow brushed against Elias' coat and settled on the lantern glass, dimming the light unless he wiped it clean every few minutes. The narrow trail twisted between tall trees, their branches bending low under the weight of snow. Each step crunched loudly, a sharp sound in the quiet night. Clara stayed close to him, her small hand tightly holding his. She did not complain, even when she stumbled. When she slipped, Elias stopped at once and steadied her. He could feel how cold she was, even through the blanket. "Are you tired?" he asked softly. She nodded but did not stop walking. "Mama is waiting." Those words pushed him forward. He adjusted the lantern higher so she could see better. The light moved across the ground, showing roots, rocks, and patches of ice. Elias knew this trail well, but at night it felt different, almost unfamiliar. Every shadow seemed deeper. Every sound carried farther. They walked for a long time. Clara's steps slowly became shorter, her breathing heavier. At one point she leaned against him, her head resting briefly against his arm. "We can rest a moment," Elias said. She shook her head. "If I sleep, I might not wake up." Elias stopped. He crouched in front of her and looked into her face. Her eyes were brave, but fear lived just beneath the surface. "You won't sleep," he said gently, "but I can carry you for a bit." Before she could answer, he lifted her carefully into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, like a bundle of sticks wrapped in cloth. She held onto his coat, pressing her face against his shoulder. Elias adjusted the lantern to his other hand and continued forward. As he walked, memories crept in. He remembered carrying his own child once, long ago, through this same forest. That memory hurt, but it also reminded him how to keep going when his arms ached and his legs burned. He focused on his breathing, on each careful step. The wind howled louder as they climbed higher. Snow fell thicker now, blurring the path. Elias stopped and looked around. The trail was fading. He scanned the trees, searching for the old markers he had placed years ago, scratches on bark, stones stacked just so. Finally, he spotted one. "We're close," he said, more to himself than to Clara. She lifted her head slightly. "Mama said it was near the broken shed." Elias nodded. He remembered it now. A small structure left behind years ago, half fallen, barely standing. Not a safe place to be, especially in winter. They moved faster. At last the lantern light caught something dark ahead. Elias slowed and raised the lantern higher. There it was, the shed. One wall had collapsed inward and snow piled against the door. Nearby something lay on the ground. Elias' heart sank. He hurried forward and gently set Clara down. She ran ahead, slipping to her knees beside the figure. "Mama!" she cried. Elias knelt beside them. The woman lay on her side, her face pale, her breathing shallow. Snow had gathered in her hair and along her coat. One leg was twisted at an unnatural angle. "She's alive," Elias said quickly, placing 2 fingers against her neck. Her pulse was weak, but it was there. The woman's eyes fluttered open. She looked at him with fear, then relief. "You came," she whispered. "Yes," Elias replied. "And we're going to help you." He worked fast. He cleared snow from around her and spread his coat beneath her to lift her off the frozen ground. He checked her leg carefully. It was badly hurt, but he avoided moving it too much. He built a small fire nearby, shielding it from the wind with his body and the shed wall. Clara hovered close, holding her mother's hand. "I was so scared," the woman said, her voice shaking. "I couldn't move. I didn't want to send her alone, but I had no choice." "You made the right choice," Elias said firmly. "She saved your life." The woman looked at her daughter, tears forming in her eyes. The fire crackled softly, sending warmth into the cold air. Elias added more wood and adjusted the lantern so it hung from a beam, lighting the small area around them. The storm raged beyond the circle of light, but here, for the moment, there was safety. Elias tore strips from a spare cloth he carried and carefully wrapped the woman's leg to keep it steady. He checked her hands and feet for signs of severe cold and rubbed them gently to bring warmth back. "We'll wait until the storm eases," he said. "Moving you now would be dangerous." The woman nodded weakly. "Thank you." They settled in for the night. Elias kept the fire alive, feeding it regularly. Clara sat close to her mother, her head resting against her shoulder. Every so often she looked up at Elias as if to make sure he was still there. Hours passed slowly. The wind screamed through the trees, shaking the shed. Snow drifted inside, but Elias blocked it as best he could. He spoke quietly, telling Clara simple stories about the mountains, about animals that lived through the winter by helping one another. Clara listened, her eyes growing heavy. "Sleep," Elias said softly. "I'll stay awake." She hesitated, then closed her eyes. As the night stretched on, Elias stared into the fire. He felt the ache in his bones, the cold seeping through his boots, but he did not move. He remembered another night, years ago, when he had waited helplessly, watching someone he loved slip away. This time was different. This time he could do something. Near dawn, the storm finally began to quiet. The wind softened. Snow fell gently instead of fiercely. The sky lightened just enough to show the outlines of the trees. The woman stirred. "Is it morning?" "Almost," Elias said. "When the light comes, we'll go back to my cabin. It's safer there." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I don't know how to thank you." Elias looked at Clara, still sleeping peacefully. "You already did," he said. As the first pale light touched the mountains, Elias stood and stretched, feeling both exhausted and steady. The hardest part was still ahead, but hope now walked beside him, as real as the lantern still burning through the night. Morning came slowly to the mountains, like a careful promise. The sky turned from deep gray to a pale blue, and the sharp wind softened into a cold breeze. Snow still covered everything, but the storm had passed. The fire Elias built during the night was now low, glowing softly. He added a few more sticks and waited for the warmth to rise again. The woman opened her eyes and looked around, confused at first. Then she remembered. Her gaze settled on her daughter, curled beside her, sleeping peacefully. "She made it," the woman whispered, her voice breaking. "Yes," Elias said quietly. "She was very brave." Clara stirred and opened her eyes. When she saw her mother awake, she smiled and hugged her tightly. "I told him where you were," Clara said proudly. "You did exactly right," her mother replied, holding her close. Elias knelt beside them. "My cabin is not far, but the trail is still difficult. We'll move slowly. I'll help you." The woman nodded. "My name is Mara," she said. "I don't know how we can ever repay you." Elias shook his head. "You don't owe me anything. Let's focus on getting you somewhere warm." He carefully helped Mara sit up. Pain crossed her face, but she stayed quiet. Elias made a strong support using a branch and cloth, steadying her injured leg as best he could. Then he lifted her slowly to her feet. She leaned heavily on him, but together they found balance. Clara stayed close, holding her mother's hand on one side while Elias supported her on the other. Step by step, they began the slow journey back through the trees. The forest looked different in daylight. What had felt threatening in the dark now seemed calm, though still wild. Snow sparkled softly on branches. Birds fluttered nearby, curious but quiet. The path was clearer now, and Elias guided them carefully around slippery patches. Mara's breathing grew uneven as they walked. Elias stopped often, letting her rest. Each time he worried the pain might become too much, but Mara pushed on, driven by the thought of warmth and safety ahead. "You live alone up here?" Mara asked during one pause. "Yes," Elias answered, "have for a long time. It must be hard." He nodded but said nothing more. As they climbed the last stretch, the cabin finally came into view. Smoke still rose faintly from the chimney, and every lantern remained lit, glowing against the snow. Clara's eyes widened. "It looks like the sun lives there," she said softly. Elias felt something tighten in his chest. He had not meant to leave the lights burning, but he was glad he had. Inside, warmth wrapped around them at once. Elias helped Mara onto the bed near the fire and covered her with thick blankets. Clara sat beside her, refusing to let go of her hand. Elias heated water and cleaned Mara's injury more carefully now. He did what he could with what he had, keeping the leg steady and warm. Then he prepared simple food, soup and bread, and handed a bowl to Clara first. "Eat slowly," he said. Clara nodded and did exactly that. Mara watched him quietly. "You know what you're doing," she said. "I learned from experience," Elias replied. As the hours passed, Mara rested. Her breathing grew steadier. Color slowly returned to her face. Clara explored the cabin carefully, touching things with wonder, but never without permission. She stopped often to look at old pictures on the wall, faded images of a younger Elias with his wife, smiling. "Who is she?" Clara asked. Elias paused. "My wife." "She looks kind," Clara said. "She was," he replied. The words hurt, but they also felt right. Later that day, Elias walked outside and followed the old trail down toward the town, sending word for proper help. By the time he returned, Mara was awake again. "They're coming," he told her. "By tomorrow." Tears filled her eyes. "You saved us." Elias looked at the fire. "I just answered a knock." Night came again, but it felt different this time. The cabin was not silent. Clara laughed softly as Elias told her a story about a stubborn mountain goat. Mara listened, smiling weakly. As everyone slept, Elias sat by the fire keeping watch. The lantern burned steady. He realized that the light he had turned on that night had not only guided a child, it had found its way back to him too. Outside, the mountain stood quiet, but inside the cabin, something new had begun. The next morning arrived with a calm silence. Sunlight filtered through the small cabin window, landing softly on the wooden floor. Elias had not slept much. He sat in his chair near the fire, listening to the quiet breathing of Mara and Clara. The fire had burned low again, and he carefully added wood so it would not crack too loudly and wake them. For years, mornings had been lonely for him. He usually rose, worked, and spoke to no one. But this morning felt different. The cabin felt alive, as if it had been waiting for voices to return. Clara was the first to wake. She rubbed her eyes and looked around, then smiled when she saw Elias. "Good morning," she whispered. "Good morning," he replied. She climbed down from the bed and sat near the fire, holding the blanket around her shoulders. Elias handed her a small piece of bread. "Will Mama be okay?" she asked quietly. "She's stronger today," Elias said. "Help is coming." Clara nodded, trusting his words without question. Mara woke a short time later. She winced as she tried to move, and Elias was by her side at once. "Slowly," he said. "No rush." "I feel better than yesterday," she said. "Still hurts, but I can breathe. That's a good sign." He checked her injury again, careful and steady. Everything looked the same, which was good. He gave her warm water and helped her sit up. "I don't remember much after the fall," Mara said. "I just remember thinking I might not see her grow up." She looked at Clara, who sat close, listening. Elias stayed quiet. He knew that fear well. The day passed slowly. Outside, the snow began to melt just a little under the sun. Elias went out several times to watch the trail, waiting for the people he had sent for. Each time he returned, Clara ran to the door to greet him, relieved to see him again. In the afternoon, distant voices echoed through the trees. Elias stepped outside and saw two figures making their way up the path with a stretcher. Relief washed over him. "They're here," he said. Mara closed her eyes, breathing out slowly. The helpers moved carefully inside the cabin. They examined Mara and nodded with approval at how her injury had been handled. "You did well," one of them told Elias. They lifted Mara gently and prepared to carry her down the mountain. Clara clung to her mother's hand, fear returning to her face. "I'll come with you," Elias said. "The path is still tricky." They moved slowly, the group careful with every step. When they reached the lower trail, the helpers thanked Elias again. "You don't have to go any farther," one said. Elias looked at Mara and Clara. "I'll walk you to town." In the town, warmth and noise filled the air. It felt strange after so many years. People stared at Elias, surprised to see him among them again. Mara was taken inside a safe building where she could rest. Before they separated, she took Elias' hand. "I don't know how to repay you," she said. "Just heal," he replied. "That's enough." Clara hugged him tightly. "Thank you for the light," she whispered. Elias watched them go, then turned back toward the mountain. The climb felt heavier now, but his heart felt lighter. When he reached the cabin again, the silence returned, but it no longer felt empty. That night, Elias lit every lantern once more, not because he was afraid, but because he wanted the light to stay. He sat by the window, watching the glow spill into the snow. Somewhere down the mountain, a mother and child were safe. And for the first time in many years, Elias felt that he was too. Days passed after that night, but the memory of it stayed with Elias like a warm ember that refused to fade. The mountain returned to its usual quiet rhythm. Snow melted slowly during the day and froze again at night. The trees stood tall and still, as if nothing had happened. Yet inside Elias something had changed. Each morning he rose as he always had. He chopped wood, checked his traps, and repaired small things around the cabin. But now, when he moved through the rooms, he noticed traces of life that had not been there before. A folded blanket by the fire, a small cup placed carefully on the table, marks in the snow outside where smaller boots had once stood. At night, Elias continued a new habit. He lit more than one lantern. One stayed by the window, glowing softly toward the trail. He told himself it was practical, that winter nights were long and light helped keep animals away. But deep down, he knew the truth. The light was a promise. Sometimes, as he sat by the fire, he found himself listening, not for danger, but for a sound he hoped might come again. A knock, a voice, someone needing help. One afternoon, nearly a week later, Elias heard footsteps outside. He stood quickly, heart jumping in a way it had not in years. When he opened the door, he saw a familiar figure climbing the last stretch of the path. It was Mara. She walked slowly, leaning on a sturdy stick, but she was smiling. Clara walked beside her, holding her hand, her cheeks bright with the cold. "You should not be climbing yet," Elias said, half worried, half relieved. Mara laughed softly. "The doctor said slow walks are good," and Clara insisted. Clara ran forward and hugged him without warning. Elias froze for a moment, then carefully placed a hand on her shoulder. "We brought something," Clara said, pulling back. Mara held out a small basket. Inside were simple foods and a folded cloth. "It's not much," Mara said, "but it's from us." Elias nodded, his throat tight. "Thank you." They sat inside the cabin, the fire warm and steady. Clara talked non-stop, telling Elias about town, about people asking questions, about how everyone called him the man with the lanterns. "They said you didn't have to help," she said, "but you did." Elias smiled gently. "People help when they can." Mara looked at him closely. "Not everyone does." They stayed until the sun dipped low. When it was time to leave, Clara stopped at the door. "Will you keep the light on?" she asked. Elias looked at the lantern by the window. "Yes," he said, "I will." After they left, the mountain felt quieter than ever, but not lonely. Elias realized that solitude and emptiness were not the same. He had chosen solitude for years because emptiness hurt less than loss. But that night when a child had knocked, emptiness had cracked open and let light in. Weeks passed, then months. Spring slowly claimed the mountain. Snow retreated into shadows and small flowers pushed through the ground. Elias worked his land and kept his routines, but now he also walked the trail more often. Sometimes he helped travelers who lost their way. Sometimes he carried supplies for those who struggled with the climb. Word spread, quietly and naturally. People learned that if the light was on, help was near. One evening, as the sun set behind the peaks, Elias sat on his porch, lantern glowing beside him. He thought of his wife, of the life they had shared. For the first time in years, the memory did not crush him. It warmed him. "I kept the promise," he whispered into the mountain air, not to anyone else, just to himself. The wind moved gently through the trees, carrying the light farther down the trail, and somewhere in the darkness, if anyone ever needed it, they would know where to go.